Thank you very much. And I know you didn't expect me to be here. The agendas say Charlie Heaps. Unfortunately, Charlie messaged me a couple of hours ago that he's stuck in Iceland because of some snow. He'll be here in a bit, but unfortunately not in time for this session. So I'll have to do it. Yeah, thank you very much, Elifs, and thank you everyone for coming here. It's very great to see you. This is a topic that we've talked about quite a lot under the LTS network, communication of scenarios. Um, Over the past couple of years, we've a lot of you have been actually participating in this work on participatory energy planning. Uh, in this process, we've spoken a lot about communication, the communication angle of stakeholder engagement, not just, let's say, getting the inputs, but really also how do you communicate? Um, so, so just kind of some basic reflections to set the scene before some of the experts here join the panel and present as well. So, so as I mentioned, we've been working on this work stream on participatory processes for strategic energy planning for the past couple of years. Actually, we kind of kickstarted this 2 forums ago in a nice participatory workshop. And you can scan the QR, but it's also on the event portal and on the IRENA webpage. So feel free to just look it up when you want. But the idea here was to develop a toolkit looking at these different ways countries, but also organizations are engaging stakeholders. What's the benefit of that? What kind of methods are you using? What kind of stakeholders are they actually engaging, and why it matters to engage with this or that stakeholder? And also looking at communication as an important pillar of participatory planning. And we talk about why participatory planning matters. And here I want to maybe take the angle of communication, right? So we're not only saying participatory planning is good because you get better input, for example, you refine your assumptions and so on. Of course, that's very important, but this session focuses on the communication. So in this sense, we have looked at some of the benefits that have been shared. So one is building energy literacy. So actually engaging stakeholders during these different activities during the planning process can build energy literacy. This can inform them about some of the complexities, which we'll talk about later, and also kind of create the foundation for more meaningful, because if there's more energy literacy, there's more ability for them as well to engage actively and more meaningfully in the process. This can also lead to better social acceptance, maybe not sometimes, but it can also lead to social acceptance and more buy-in as well through this communication process, through this participatory process. It can help prevent some opposition, build support for projects when you're sharing the benefits, for example, of a certain project and what that means for, let's say, social and environmental benefits that come along with it, and can create more legitimacy for policy decisions. And it can also, and this is quite important here, that this participatory planning and this clear communication can really help identify real-world priorities, the priorities that the stakeholders care about, that you might not necessarily find in an energy model, for example, that you cannot always put in an energy model, avoid these blind spots that these models have as well, and really reveal what matters to them. So maybe this can be addressed in a future iteration, or maybe this can be addressed in a different kind of plan or policy, but it can really help at least this process reflect what the stakeholders need and want to listen to, let's say. And as I show as well, this knowledge exchange is not just experts talking to stakeholders or the opposite way. It's really a bilateral discussion, an iterative process that can that really needs effective communication for more meaningful planning, and vice versa. You need meaningful planning as well to more effectively communicate and more constantly communicate as well. So in this, I won't get into this, but we've looked into the 3 different categories, let's say, of engaging stakeholders, more on the knowledge gathering. So gathering input through workshops, interviews, and surveys. This is not, of course, this is not absolute. Workshops work both ways, interviews do as well, but this is broad categories. We have co-creation, where we have, for example, some networks and hubs and transdisciplinary, for example, committees working on planning, as well as dissemination. So here we're talking more about this, I wouldn't say final part, but the presentations, the reports, the visualization and games that will also be shared now by some of the participants. But here also we're talking about who are you communicating with. So understanding the priorities for these different stakeholders is really critical for effective communication. And this is kind of where we start brainstorming and thinking about the session, is really trying to understand the priorities so not only the communication method, let's say, but what are the priorities that shape the needs, but also the communication strategies themselves. So in the end, we also talk about how successful engagement really requires tailored approaches. You cannot just, a technical report does not interest everyone. We know that. But also when you're tailoring, what kind of capacities, interests, constraints are you really thinking about and trying to communicate? Sorry about the slide, but we had an interesting session about this just here last year. We shared that there were some nice experiences shared about, for example, there were some recommendations, and I'm saying this here as well because I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about it, but just to reiterate that, for example, dedicating actual project time to communication. You can just, for example, have one person, so leave it at the end. All right, we have the model, we have the scenarios and so on, and we'll just publish it in a dashboard, but really dedicate 20% for planning this, for and disseminating. We had an interesting comment as well about not surprising anyone. So sharing drafts, sharing different results throughout the process as well. So you're not necessarily surprising anyone. And this, if you present it towards the end, maybe there's more of a chance of someone just saying, no, I don't agree with this. And connecting long-term goals to what we have to do today, especially when talking to policymakers, for example, or governments maybe who have shorter political cycles. It's important to also show what you want to do today. But these are interesting challenges we heard. And I think, for example, Tina was here as well and shared one of those. But she mentioned, for example, about practicing talking to Parliament. So you have to talk to Parliament for 2 to 5 minutes. How will you put the scenarios in this way that they can actually reach the message actually reaches them? Someone talked about learning from artists as well and how they see energy differently. Maybe you can talk about the energy transition. It means decarbonization for you, but it means clean air for someone, and so on. So really trying to think about the different ways people think about this, right? And finally, we had a fun challenge as well, is asking people, please try to write for your local newspaper next week. Think about writing an op-ed, and what does that mean? Can you translate the scenarios that you've been working on for the past year or two and put it in a way that it will even be published? Or will it just end up looking like a lot of jargon, for example? So those are some fun challenges, and I'd like to also expand on that later on in the session. But what we're trying to do here when we're talking with everyone is really trying to also take a step back. And we'll hear more about this in the scene setting presentations from colleagues, but really asking the modelers, the planners, and so on, what do you think about the scenarios you're developing? What do you think about the models? What do you think you're getting out of them? The second is, what do the users think about the scenarios you're developing? Right. So again, looking at the perception from the user and from the developer, and then what does that imply for communicating scenarios effectively? So this is a kind of just posing some questions early on. We'll start getting some answers now in the next presentation from Francisca. So I would like to call Francisca. And maybe while she's on her way, I would like to also thank, we have a couple of colleagues as well here that have been part of this participatory planning toolkit process in the Scientific Advisory Committee. So we have Andre and Evangelos here, but also we have not here with us, but Diana as well and Connor McCucken that have been part of Scientific Advisory Committee. So just special thanks and to everyone who was involved. With that, I will finish my remarks and we'll move over. Yes. to the first scene setting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's very much my pleasure to be here. It's really great to have this opportunity to share some of my work with you, in particular, because I think I take a bit of a different approach to this topic, or I look at it from a different angle. My background is in economics, and I take a social science approach to how models are used and developed. And as Nadim already announced, I would like to take a little bit of a step back today and talk a little bit with you about how modelers see the explanatory power and the content of truth and objectivity in their work. So, and the first thing I would like to state here is really that long-term modeling sits at the intersection of evidence-based science and future studies. And I think this is something we sometimes tend to forget in everyday life. So we take these tools that really are built on the hard sciences, built on math, built on physics, but we take them and try to look with them into the future. And when we look into the future, there's a different set of rules that we need to apply. And this is really the context in which I am doing my research and I'm interested in. So what can happen is that models and model-based scenarios may falsely offer the illusion of sound and certain knowledge. So they create something of a veneer of scientific legitimacy, because again, we think they are science, or sometimes at least they're perceived as such. At the same time, we know, however, that scenarios are more likely to shape than to foresee the future. So we know that the scenarios we are developing with our tools, they impact what tomorrow might look like, and that can come in the shape of self-fulfilling prophecies, but it might also turn to self-defeating prophecies, right? So this is something I think we should talk more about within the modeling community. And to that end, what I did was do a survey with modelers. So I was interested in what are modelers' beliefs concerning the certainty and objectivity of knowledge in energy modeling and scenarios, and how do they perceive the division of responsibility and the information asymmetry at the model policy interface. And I was very lucky in that I could get together quite a bunch of modelers to take the survey. So I have 166 responses in the data set, and it's quite a broad set of voices in there. So we have people from 51 different countries with 43 different native languages. About half of them are based in Europe and another almost 30% in Africa. So it is quite a diverse set, so hopefully fit for this context. And the first insight I'd like to share based on this survey is there is limited consensus among modelers regarding their epistemic beliefs and their views on scenarios. So first of all, what are epistemic beliefs? Epistemic beliefs are one's views on knowledge, on how knowledge is acquired, on how certain it is, and on what counts as truth. So we developed a set of 18 Likert statements that are based on existing literature and questionnaires on epistemic beliefs. And these statements include, for instance, in this field, modelers can come to the correct answer. Or in this field, true answers are more of an opinion than a fact. Or in this field, it is important to question the subjective choices a modeler makes in the light of their origin and worldviews. And these are the results. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of polarization in there. So the modeling community doesn't agree on whether there's any truth and objectivity in this or not. Second insight. We do observe patterns in the respondent's assessment of these different Likert statements, which reveal two stylized worldviews. So here in this overwhelming chart, you see the correlation between the different statements. So again, we had 18 statements over 9 themes. And for each theme, there were 2 statements that were opposing each other. So if you have completely consistent opinions, we could assume that you have 9 out of the 18 statements with which you would agree. And this cluster says that actually, if we do look at the actual responses of the people who participated, there is quite some consistency over 8 out of 9 possible statements. And that leads us to the two stylized worldviews, the positivist modeler and the post-positivist modeler. So the positivist modeler has a weak to moderate tendency to agree with these statements in the cluster, and they might believe that personal backgrounds are irrelevant. They might strive for correct answers and objective truth. They might assume that there's universally accepted and time-consistent approaches in this field. And they might prefer direct recommendations on actionable results across different situations and contexts. So for instance, when sharing their outcomes as recommendations with decision makers. The post-positivist modeler has a weak to moderate tendency to disagree with the statements in this cluster, and they might then stress that personal background significantly influence model and results. They might reject the idea of achieving objective truth as part of this work. They might also assume that there's really ever evolving and diversely understood principles that this work is based on. And they might promote a diversity of perspectives in modeling outcomes that analyze the available options for action. So rather showing up different options instead of saying, this is what we recommend. So we then did a k-means clustering analysis. So basically trying to find out, if we look at all of our respondents, are there any clear groups that emerge? And we do have two clusters. So there's cluster A, about 1/3 of our sample, which is more agreeing. And we have cluster B, which is more neutral, disagreeing, and that is about 2/3 of the sample. And what I'm saying is that we, of course, within all of this also looked at differences between different demographic groups. And the one thing that for individual-like statements, as well as for these clusters, is important is geographic location. We cannot say what really is causal here, right? There could be different theories. So there might be cultural components. There might also be components that are linked to capacity development factors, to experience. And we have reason to believe that this plays a role. But especially in a setting like this, where we do have a lot of people who really work also on these topics across national borders, really across different human languages with these mathematical tools, I think this is something important to keep in mind. Which leads me to the third insight. According to modelers, modeling is a team sport. And I think this is a really nice conclusion, especially when we talk about the topic of participation, despite the information asymmetries between them and decision makers. And this very colorful chart, which I hope you can sort of see even from the back, this is based on a slider type question in the survey. So on the very left-hand side, we assume that the modeler is mainly responsible, the yellow part, and on the very right-hand side, the purple part, we assume that the decision maker is mainly responsible for a given task. And everything in the middle consists then of the assumed shared responsibility. So we asked respondents on a little slider to pull the slider where they think the division of responsibility between themselves as the modeler and the decision maker sit. And in the first part, we had a basic assumption. We say that modeler and decision maker, they have some sort of a contract arrangement and they can communicate. And these are the results. So we see that the modeler is more responsible for transparent communication. And we see that the decision maker is more in charge of a responsible scenario use. However, for most of the aspects, even the very technical ones, so including the definition of scenarios to investigate, the tailoring of model assumptions, and the selection of input data, there's actually the assumptions of a shared responsibility. Modeling is a team sport. In the next chart, we come to an adjusted version of this, and I'm saying this in advance because I would like for you to pay attention to how the boxes shift. The next chart shows the assumed division of responsibility if we explicitly say that modeler and decision maker do not come from the same background and context. So assume, for instance, an international cooperation kind of project. And this is what happens. The boxes shift a little to the right and the boxes become a little larger. So the modeler and the decision maker communicate, and they are from different national and cultural contexts. The result is implicitly, of course, that the information asymmetry between them increases. So there's comparatively higher responsibility here assigned by the respondents to the decision maker. And there's a little less agreement among the respondents, so hence the lengthening boxes. However, modeling is still a team sport in this case, even more so when the modeler and the decision maker have different backgrounds. We also asked the respondents about the information asymmetry. And we do see that, according to them, and I would share this belief, there is indeed a bilateral information asymmetry between modeler and decision maker. And it looks like this. It's a very similar chart. Here we didn't ask for the slider to be pulled where respondents believe the responsibility sits, but they were asked to pull the slider where they think the information advantage sits. So if the box is closer to the left-hand side, then there's an information advantage with the modeler, and on the right-hand side with the decision maker. And what we see here, the top being real-world context to be analyzed, their respondents believe the information advantage rests with the decision maker. And at the lower half, the model structure and assumptions, the information advantage rests with the modeler. And we do see here again, the top of the respective boxes being modeler and decision maker can communicate without further assumptions. And the second, the lower parts here, we assume they're from different backgrounds. So again, we see when we assume that modeler and decision maker come from different backgrounds, the information asymmetry also shifts a little bit. And we here can see that modelers believe that then the information advantage when it comes to the local context, to the real world context, even more so sits with the decision maker. So the important part I would like to stress here is that the assumed information availability does not always match the responsibilities assigned to the parties. And I think this is something very interesting, where you can draw some psychological conclusions even. If you think about a modeler who would like a decision maker to take some responsibility also for the more technical parts, for finding good assumptions, for really defining a setup and a scenario that works for a given case, even if they are aware of the fact that maybe the decision maker has less information about this topic. This really, I think, shows up a lot of the tension we see in modeling projects, where modelers, as well as the civil servants, the energy planners on different sides, are also pulled in different directions by many political factors, by power factors. If we try to bring all of this together, what are implications then for modeling and communicating scenarios at the science policy interface? So again, modelers are divided on whether there is any objectivity in models and scenarios, and I argue that this really matters. And the question is, do we present a possibility or do we present a truth? So if we present the notion of possibility, then this might really expand the perceived scope of action and provide agency to act. Again, assuming that scenarios rather shape the future than foresee it. If we present scenarios like that, this is really something that can trigger new action, that can bring people together to pull in the same direction where they want to go. If we, however, present more of a notion of truth, then this may really reduce the perceived scope of action and thus effectively delegate decision-making power to the model. And that in turn, of course, means to the developers of this tool and the scenarios. Then we had the fact that modelers consider modeling a team sport, even more so when they work with decision makers in a context different from their own background. So this is, again, a communication aspect that we also should consider, that effective communication between modeler and decision maker is absolutely essential for a relevant and fit for context model and scenario design. And the larger the information asymmetries, the higher the risk of ineffective communication. And again, we also know, and we've talked with several of you already over lunch about this topic, that in many projects we are under a lot of time pressure. There's many people coming together, and these decision-making processes often have to happen fast. So this is something we also should keep in mind. To what degree is this really then beneficial for the results? And with that in mind, I would like to close with some ideas for the way forward that I would like to share with you. So I suggest that we reconsider how we set up modeling teams. So what skills and expertise do we need? First of all, I'm a social scientist, I have to raise this flag. I would really encourage the inclusion of social scientists and communication experts. Modeling, we see a lot of expertise when it comes to programming, when it comes to the technological side, to the math side, in modeling projects. And first of all, of course, that is absolutely necessary. However, it's also asking a lot of those modelers to also be great communication experts, to also be great experts in a given political context, to be great social scientists, to have an idea about the power plays that happen between different actors. So this is something I would really like to push, that we need to have more expertise coming from different disciplines in these projects. And we need to create diverse modeling teams which comprise experts of different genders and cultural backgrounds. Again, linking also to the fact that in our results we did see there are some different opinions in different parts of the world. Including these in our projects will make them richer and will include more perspectives that bring new results. Second point, teaching modeling as a craft. What knowledge is essential beyond the work with code and data? So I think the results, the fact that there's a lot of disagreement within the modeling community. Is this truth? Is this objective? Is this an art? Is this a science? This is really something that should teach us that we need to discuss this more and openly in the modeling community. We also should reconsider how we do capacity development programs and higher education curricula. So coming back to my very first entry point, I would really like to encourage everyone who's active in this space to think, how can we include perspective from science and technology studies as well as future studies in how we teach these topics? The programming work is essential. The technical knowledge about energy systems is essential. However, we're using this knowledge to try to look into the future and draw conclusions, and there's different rules that apply. And I would love to see and talk about how that can be integrated. Finally, structuring modeling projects. How can we better prepare for co-creation and participation? So I'm very excited to see that modelers apparently do believe we need more co-creation and participation. However, and you all know this, if we don't include this in the financial and personal resources that we budget in our projects, it's probably not going to happen. And this was also raised earlier. So this is something I would also like to bring here and discuss with you. How can we structure projects to take this into account? And with that, I close. And if you would like to hear more about these results, please also take a look at this paper that includes much of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franziska. We have another scene setting presentation as well now from Dr. Evangelos Panos from Paul Scherrer Institute. I would like to call him up to the podium. So we had a very interesting presentation right now from Franziska. I think it talks, yes, as we mentioned, about the perceptions, the biases that modelers do have. And we'd like to kind of link it now, has served as a bridge as well now with Evangelos. We'll talk more about this, about also the user side, and provide more of the practical implications and the tools and so on that you can use as well to bridge this gap. So Evangelos, please.
Thank you, Nadim, for the introduction. And basically, I would like to follow up from the last point from Franziska. I'm so happy that Franziska set the scene for me, actually. So basically, how we can create meaning from our models. And in other words, as Franziska said, how we can make co-creation from our model. So I'm from the Paul Scherrer Institute. I am leading the energy economics group there. And we are doing scenarios and we are doing modeling. And the challenge that we have is how to have these scenarios to be more understood, how to create trust on the scenarios that we develop. And in the end, how these scenarios can shape decisions, can be useful for decisions. In other words, creating meaning. So as we all agree, the scenarios guide long-term energy choices, but their impact depends on trust and understanding. And the challenge is to turn the scenarios and the complexity of them into real stories, into stories that we can tell to the people and the people can find themselves into these stories. And what we need here, we need several things. And this is what I'm going to touch in my presentation. First, we need to build capacity for interpretation from the users of the scenarios to deal with this complexity. We need to translate the abstract numbers, what is 20 gigawatt of solar? I don't know. We need to translate these numbers into live experiences. What do this mean for me? We need to co-create narratives with the stakeholders. We need to expose them on the trade-offs and uncertainties very clearly. We need to link the models, as I said also before, to output to the daily realities. And it is not only that, we need to continue to maintaining this credibility and openness. So join me now. I will guide you through some tools that we are using in projects in Switzerland, where we try to deal with all these challenges, and you're going to see how we apply these tools and what effects we are getting out of them. We will start from perception studies that deal with the build of the capacity for interpretation. We will play a game. You will be invited to play a game after my talk and after the panel, not between, in order to see how your decisions shape the future. And then we are going to talk about multi-criteria decision analysis in order to expose trade-offs and uncertainties. Multi-criteria satisfaction analysis, which will allow us to link the model outputs to realities. And in the end, stakeholder forums and ways to engage with stakeholders that will help us to maintain credibility and openness. So the first thing that I would like to touch is the building capacity for interpretation. And to do this, we need first to identify where is the perception gap between the non-modelers and the modelers. And we went to Switzerland, to the Swiss stakeholders, and we interviewed them. This is a research that happens in a research program which is called Co-Simulation of Society and Energy System. And we found that the users of the scenarios trust institutions, not the model depth necessary. The trust is highest in academic and public studies, not studies from private companies or consultants. There is different meaning of what is a scenario. A scenario for a modeler usually is an assumption or an internal consistent set of assumptions, if you prefer. For a user, it can be a forecast. The users expect more transparency and social realism. And there are some mixed views from the users, whether the scenario that they see represents a forecast, in the end, the most likely development, or it is one of the full range of the outcomes. So there is a perception gap. And we did a further survey, and I'm sorry that this is so small here, but you can focus on the distance between the blue and red dots. The blue dots are the users, and the red dots are the modelers. And we went and asked them, we asked 105 energy modelers and 244 users in Switzerland again, about what is the purpose of the scenario and what are the beliefs of the scenarios. And we can see here that some responses align and some others are very far away. So for example, when we look at the purpose of the scenarios, both users and modelers agree that a scenario should analyze feasibility of existing energy policy goals and also to identify technologically feasible transition pathways. However, the modelers put more emphasis on the economic viability of the pathway because the models are doing cost optimization or they assess the economic implications. This is something that we can measure, but the users are calling more for a social desirable scenarios. Both of them, however, agree that they need the scenarios to inform the experts and the public. And here, keep this in mind, because if we go to the beliefs of the scenarios, we are going to see that, of course, there is an agreement that the scenarios are to inform the energy policy and be useful for the energy industry. But if we are looking a little bit further on the chart of the right-hand side, we are going to see that the users prefer radically different scenarios, while the modelers do not see this. So here is a manage of expectations issue. The modelers want to be the scenarios useful to inform the experts, but the experts have another thinking of how to use the scenarios. And this is something that we need to address. And now how we address these perception gaps. So to be able to manage these expectations and address these gaps, we need to make the users also to be the modelers or vice versa. So we need to translate the numbers into experiences. And what we do here is that we are using the so-called serious games. This is in another research program in Switzerland. It's called SwissSur, where PSI coordinates. And here we develop a game which we are all invited to play, which we call it Ensured Energy, and it's an online simulation of the Swiss energy system. Behind these games, he has very complex models and very complex scenario framework. But the users do not see this complexity. They just play the game. So we invited 6,000 citizens and stakeholders. 2,000 of them respond positively to our invitation. And 750 of them managed, because the game is difficult, to complete more than 7 rounds. Every round is a period from today to 2050. The players allocate budgets, they decide on energy imports, and also they have to manage shocks on the energy system, weather shocks, financial shocks, societal shocks, several types. So this serious games helps participants to experience energy trade-offs firsthand and reflect on the system complexity. And we did also a survey after that game to see what we learned about that. Before I go to the results of the survey, you can see here how the game looks like. So you have a nice map of Switzerland, and you have locations where you can build the different power plants, and you have a certain budget to spend, and also you need to manage the supply of energy for winter and summer. And of course, you have to achieve net zero. Too many things to do, basically. But a model can do it like this, but the user needs to do it by thinking. So the players act, decide, see the outcomes. They can see how the choices that they make create lock-ins, and they can see what regret options are there. So such a game encourages reflection rather than persuasion. And we found that after playing the game, the participants show a slightly higher support for energy-related policies, but there was a limited impact on efficacy or attitudes towards the energy transition. Also, the game seemed to engage more the ones that were interested in any case about the energy transition compared to engage those that were indifferent. And that is a problem that we need to tackle. So the game is not a silver bullet here. It's a promising tool, though. We can discuss about that more in the panel. And having put the users into the modeler perspective, we make them users modelers. It's also important to transform the outputs of our scenarios into choices. It is important that the stakeholders see how their priorities shape the energy system. And this is what we called here multi-criteria decision analysis. So what we do here, we reduce the complexity. We reduce the complexity of scenarios that has very complex outputs, bar charts of different sectors of electricity, transport, mobility. Millions of data points and results are in a scenario. We reduce this complexity to a handful set of indicators or criteria. And then we ask the stakeholders to provide preferences on these indicators, what indicator is important for them. Then we present the result of this indicator, and we can see how their choice can reflect on the pathway that we assess. I will go through a concrete example. So we have, let's say, 2 phases when we apply a multi-criteria decision analysis. In the first phase, we ask the participants to select their 3 top criteria from economy, environment, sociopolitics, and resilience. And you can see in this chart here, sorry, it's very small, but I hope that you will get the presentations, that the energy system cost is a very high priority, following by greenhouse gas emissions, grid security, impact on ecosystems, And there are also other indicators, even an indicator of how politically feasible is a certain pathway. And then, based on they reveal their weights, then we have quantified our scenarios, we have quantified our pathways, and through this quantification, we provide numbers to these indicators. And we present these numbers to the stakeholders, and we tell them, look, based on your preferences, this is the pathway that performs best on average for you. Or this is the pathway that is more robust across shocks, because we don't have only an assessment of a pathway, we have an assessment of a pathway across different shocks, environmental, financial, societal. And also we can discuss with them which pathways perform best under the worst shock. So in this regard, the stakeholders can see how their choices shape the future. But also, we need to go to local communities. And here we need to understand how these scenarios now can be translated to everyday lives. So we need to go and ask the people how they have by having this technology in their neighborhood. This is the MUSA framework that we apply, multi-criteria satisfactory analysis, and we applied this in the context of a European project, which we call it WIMBY, Wind in My Backyard. We went to 5 areas in Europe. Most of them is in the Mediterranean Sea, 2 in Spain, 1 in Italy, 1 in Greece. And we asked them, what is your satisfaction by having wind turbine in your neighborhood? And we found out that the local priorities differ, and they differ because the stakeholders differ in socioeconomic backgrounds and scenario understanding. So the local stakeholders had expressed environmental concerns, societal concerns, individual benefits, not so much about how cheap is the technology. And also, if we went and asked also the tourists and the visitors, what is your satisfaction? How happy you are if you see a wind turbine there? And they were not so much happy. Probably it was because of the Instagram, I don't know. So the acceptance is something that needs really to be assessed. This framework helps us to translate complex scenarios into daily lives. And how we do this, just a small glimpse. It is not just a survey on the satisfaction. This is something far beyond that. We ask the users, first of all, what is your acceptance of this policy? What is your satisfaction of this technology? Okay, they give a single number, but then we have also additional criteria where we ask them to reveal their satisfaction as well. And then we fit special functions, nonlinear satisfaction functions, in order to map which criteria contributed most to the overall satisfaction index. So like this, we can reveal what it matters for the local communities from the scenario results. And then we can come to policy recommendations, what to improve, where to improve, and for whom to improve the policy. So such a framework, the multi-criteria satisfaction analysis, enriches standard survey with MCDA logic. And this is my almost last slide, okay? Sorry for that. So the final tool that we have is the stakeholder forum. This is from dialogue to the shared ownership to maintain credibility and openness. I'm pretty sure that all of you are familiar with such kind of fora, so I don't go into much detail. But what I would like to say here is that we should be careful not to have these stakeholder forums as a static forum, not that we have people sitting in the table and be passive receiving information, or in the best case, maybe they exchange on something. Let them play, let them engage. So we do additional activities. So we let them, for example, to find differences between the scenarios, to find differences how the energy system shapes, if I put more emphasis on environment or I put more emphasis on economy. We have them to play musical chairs, where the music plays, you run around the chair, always there is one chair less, If you are lucky, you sit in the chair. If you are not lucky, you have two choices. Either you stand up and you are out of the game. So this means that you fail in the competition, or you sit on the legs of one other person. So this means you collaborate. And, and then, of course, we can have policy documents as interactive outputs. So this is the toolbox that we apply in Switzerland in several research projects in order to engage the stakeholders, serious games for immersion and learning, MCDA workshops for structured reflection on the scenarios, perception surveys to map the trust and expectations between modelers and users, the MUSA framework for satisfaction analysis and acceptance, and the stakeholder forums. And these tools help us to move from models to meaning. We test this tool, they work so far, but there is big discussion that we can take also in the panel. And this is my colleagues that I would like to thank who are experts in this field. And thank you very much, and sorry for being a little bit over time.
Thank you very much, Evangelos. So I think we have a very nice now link from the developers to the users and to what can be done. The next step here is that we'll hear from a country perspective, a short presentation on linking the social, environmental, socioeconomic priorities that are, I think, are clearly, let's say, top priorities for users, and how that can be communicated, let's say, from a government perspective. So I'd like to call Johanna Castellanos from UPME, Colombia, for a presentation. So before we start the panel, so thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here. It's an honor to present the work that we are developing in the mining and energy unit in Colombia. It's a mixing that our colleagues present before, and some mixed with the optimization model. So we try, before to hear you, of course, to apply your theories, not all, of course, but I try to show you our case. So this is our national energy plan, that this is all energy perspective. And we are changing the scope. Why? Okay, first of all, I want to introduce a little bit the energy plan, just for understand the context. So usually we publish a document, but nowadays we change completely the energy plan. Why? Now we have 3 documents in that, because in the first volume, we explain all concepts or scenarios, the conceptualization of the scenarios. In the second one, we have the national plan, that usually we did some scenarios and some analysis of economical analysis and public policy recommendations. But in this year, we want to develop a regional plan that includes all perspective for different regions in our country. So I just have a couple of minutes. I don't be deep in this slide. Just this is the more pillars. I want to focus on the 4 pillars, that is inclusive and justice. For us, it's very important to have the environmental and social aspects in our planning. And this slide is just for mention that we align with the International Energy Agency scenarios. So we developed three scenarios. And of course, the carbon neutrality is go to our NDC goals, and of course, including the justice in this scenario. How? This is one of our practice, probably that Evangelion, no. Go, Evangelion. Sorry. Your last proposal, that some firms, we developed some forums with different stakeholders in order to capture the needs or the perspective of different entities. We try to do some games, not super, of course, not video games or serious game, but we try to do some activities, and it works perfectly because we can acquire different perspective of different stakeholders. So we, of course, develop the stage and we co-create the objective of the energy plan with the communities, with the government, with the grain agrupations of energy sector. So, and we developed a workshop for environmental analysis and, of course, technical workshop for define and co-create energy scenarios. So this is an application that some strategies that you talk about. And which will some small data we invite to 140 stakeholders, and we receive around 239 proposals for around 4 institutions. These are the institutions in our country. Oh, sorry. Okay, no. But this is very important. I agree with you that when we co-create and we talk with different stakeholders, we can have an acceptation, or we can include all proposals for different perspectives, and it's very important for the planning. So how we can integrate into the document? So we published the first version for the national scenarios that include all of this perspective, and we develop these workshops in different parts of the country. We travel and we ask to the people, to the local people, and try to capture the insights. And how, okay, it is very important. We can acquire different perspectives and proposals, and we propose to modify our optimization model. So for close the gap that you show, what think the modelers and what thinks the people. So the modelers all time try to think in economic variables because need to quantify everything. However, how try to close this gap between the communities and stakeholders and modelers' perspective. So we propose to change the objective function into the model. It means now we are not thinking in minimize the cost. Now we are trying to maximize the social welfare. And in that directions, we can include, sorry, this is boring, but probably for modelers probably like it. But we try to include into the objective function and into the constraints different social environmental variables that can modify the decision of the model. So it's not just to take the perception of the stakeholders. We are working on include some of these variables into the model. So just for summarize what type of variables we are including nowadays. For example, the end-of-life management and the material recovery, the final disposal phase, the refrigerant emissions, the employment creations and employment loss. I don't know if you know, but Colombia depends nowadays of the fossil fuels economy. So for us, it's very important the productive reconversions or labor reconversions. So we try to include the labors and the jobs into the model. Of course, the emissions is very important, the social and territorial dimensions. So how can include it? For example, the use of land or different variables. Finally, it can affect the energy potential. So we can geographically modify, of course, to put realistic regional energy potential, because now we have 7 regions. And finally, we have, or we include 62 demands and 40,000 technologies. So with all of these variables and with all of these parameters, we try to include in our new planning this change of the model. Just for complement, I want to say that we are programming and developing our own model. It's based on osmosis, but now we are changing the osmosis because we are changing the optimization problem. And of course, I mentioned that we are, this is Colombia. I want to present you, I don't know if all of you know our country. And we divide the country in 7 regions. What was the criteria? We used the 5 electrical regions, and additionally, we include the not interconnected zones. Can you hear me? This part is not interconnected. All of these 5 regions are in the interconnected area. And this is an island, San Andres and Providencia, that is another, of course, not interconnected. So we have 7 regions. So we are not too big as Brazil, for example, but the point is, in a small country, you can find very different weather conditions. So, for example, the middle is completely different with the north, and this environment condition affects, of course, the behaviors, the electrical demand, and whatever. So nowadays, for example, the north of Colombia is the critical electrical area. And of course, in the south or the violet, you can see we don't have any network because the dispersion is too high. So depending on the region, we try to focus the energy plan. So just for summarize all of these environmental and social variables, of course, we are working with water consumption, emissions, local populace, availability, job creations, location of industry. For us, it's very important, the industrialization, because we need to change our economy. It's not just a technological transition, it's an economical transition. So for us, it's very important to try to see what happens with the jobs, with the industry, and with the development of the economy. And of course, we are working in the just energy transition, working together with different stakeholders and try to modify the tools, the optimization tools made in locally host in UPME. And this is the experience that I want to share with you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have now a panel discussion. This segment has gone a few minutes over. I know there's some restrictions, but we might have to go a few minutes over what we've expected. In any case, I would like to call the panelists up to the panel. We have a big panel today. So I would just like to call Lars Georg Jensen, so from the Danish Energy Agency. You've met Lars in the morning. I'd like to call Sebastian Debia, so from policy analyst from Natural Resources Canada, or co-hosting and co-designing this session with. Sebastian, please. Johanna, of course, please welcome to the panel as well. And Evangelos and Francisca, of course. And last but not least as well, Andre Seglars, so Director of Energy Systems at Renewables Grid Initiative, and also coordinator of the Stakeholder Reference Group for the 10-year Network Development Plan on the European level. But we'll talk more about this in a bit. So I think we've had a very interesting set of presentations. We've started with these differences in, maybe I'll move a bit here. Yeah, no, it's the big panel side. But we've had a very good set of presentations. I think we had a great discussion from Francisca again about what modelers think about their work. We heard a lot as well now about what does that mean as well then for the users, what kind of tools are being used, and then we heard a very interesting country example of that. I mean, you've co-designed these scenarios and you've included, went to, let's say, big measures as well to include these different environmental and social priorities that these users have into the scenarios. So I would like first to start with this panel discussion before we move over to questions and answers later on, and maybe with the final round as well by the panelists. So I will begin. I'll ask in order, basically from seating, about your reflections. So Lars, if you can maybe reflect from the Danish Energy Agency's perspective on the presentations at the beginning. Do you notice from the planner's side, let's say, some biases that have affected some of the scenarios? Anything from the users as well, and how what effect has had on how you're communicating scenarios as well? Yeah, the microphone is there, so please.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, wow, there's a lot to be said here because it's like some very, very interesting presentations. And yes, it's we do deal a lot with who are we actually writing for. In our case, we have a legal obligation to monitor to what extent the objectives for reducing greenhouse gas emissions are actually on course to being reduced. Are we on course to actually achieving our targets? So that's sort of the overall purpose of our climate outlook. And of course, is there a bias in that? Yes, of course, there's a bias in that because we are very much looking at that one parameter. Are we going to achieve our targets or not? So you can say there's a lot of things we don't look at, or we don't look at as many things as they do in Colombia, I can tell you. We don't answer all questions. Basically, we don't answer the most crucial question of all, which is how is life gonna be in 30, 20, 35, 40, 50 or something like that. We just answer the questions as how do we get to 70% reduction in 2030 and how do we get to carbon neutrality? But we don't tell anything about what life is actually going to be like. So that's a bias, yes, it's a huge bias. But can we answer that? I'm not so sure. I mean, what we do is that we try to put forward all the assumptions. Franziska's presentation really is like, gosh, there were so many things that I wanted to say to that because I've been sitting as an editor of receiving all these modelers results, right? And when I started out as a modeler 10, 12 years, not as a modeler, as an editor, and the modelers sent me numbers and said, go and write the chapters. And I said, no, I'm not going to write the chapters. I'm not going to write a report. You are going to send me a chapter with the interpretation of your numbers, your results. And then I'm going to look at it and tell you whether it's interesting or not. And some of them I came back to and said, this is not very interesting. And then they had to reformulate. Yes, is that a bias? Yes, because they came with something which was not very interesting, to be frank. So is there a bias in that? Yeah, I used a bias for myself, right? Another bias, I know we don't have much time. Another bias is what kind of approach do you choose? So we have an approach, for instance, which is a sectoral approach, which makes sense in the sense that you have an energy sector which is developing very fast, and we have a lot of renewable energy and so on. And then we have, for instance, we have what we call a household sector. And it turns out in the results over the past years that the household sector over the course of time don't really matter. Why? Because the only thing we sort of put in the household sector are those who have their own individual burners, because they get electricity from the sector called the electricity sector, and they get the heat from the heating sector. So that's why we allocate the emissions to all of that. So the household sector doesn't really seem to be matter. And this is wrong because, of course, it matters what we do at home. So that's a clear bias in the way that we measure it, in the way we structure our outlooks. So I can continue, but yes, there's a lot of bias in it. And I'm certainly European in the sense that I don't think we present the truth. We present a possible outcome given the assumptions that we have used, and we try to be transparent and open as much as we possibly can about those assumptions. If the assumptions change, then the results will also change, and we try to be open about that.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Please.
Yeah, so thank you. So from the sense setting presentation, what I like particularly is its slide about positivist modeler and post-positivist modeler. Like I'm on the policy making side, and yeah, no policy maker has any sense of positive modeling here, like positivism. We don't believe that any one model contains any one general truth. We like to see as many models as we can, as many scenarios as we could, explore any source of potential risk. We are very risk averse. So that's kind of what I retained the most of this setting presentation. Yeah, and I also thought about on all this discussion about bias, about the Daniel Tversky and Kahneman loss bias. So it is also something very present in policymaking. Like the public and the policymaker also by extension, but the public is very much more feels much more negative, much more loss than a gain. So twice as much. And this is something also we have to take into account in our policymaking.
Thank you. Maybe a bit of a different angle, but maybe first I would like to ask Andre if you can maybe introduce what I think you mentioned two aspects that you would, let's say, present here. But maybe if you could present first what the stakeholder reference group is, and maybe what are the aspects, let's say now from the user side as well as the developers, because I know they have the experience there, that have resonated the most with stakeholders in the planning process. So what has resonated? I think, for example, we hear about, again, the social, environmental aspects that were very crucial to users. I'd like to hear from your experience. How has it been? And has there been any kind of channels opened as well to try to address those? So trying to link those priorities as well to the modelers and developers. Please.
Yes, thank you, and also thank you for the invitation. Maybe just to give some background information, I will be talking about the European grid planning process that is based on the scenarios, and those scenarios are important because, as you all know, they will determine how the infrastructure shall be planned, developed, and implemented. So this is kind of a European scope, not only countryside. And our experiences. So we have been dealing with the European grid planning process that it's called TYNDP, 10 years Network Development Plan. It's being developed every 2 years. And before the stakeholder reference group, as a part of RGI, Renewables Grid Initiative, already, I would say, 8, 9 years ago, together with a coalition of NGOs, civil society actors, the main concern was whether these scenarios are compatible with Paris Agreement. So is the infrastructure planned in Europe in a way that actually is compliant with the decision made 1 or 2 years earlier in Paris that we are going to reach climate neutrality, stay on the pathway for 1.5. There was no existent scenario by then to prove that. So what the coalition of NGOs did, including RGI and some of our colleagues, we decided to develop our own scenarios. So that is called PAC, Paris Agreement Compatible scenario, that was contributing to the European process of development of the electricity grid, or let's say energy system as a whole. So the main one of the first concerns was whether the infrastructure planning is on the target. This is not the concern anymore. Throughout the last years, the situation changed, but also the European regulation changed. 3 years ago, the new regulation set up a need to create something that is called scenario guidelines. This is being developed by the Agency of European Energy Regulators. And these scenario guidelines, they put specific criteria and conditions how European scenarios for the infrastructure shall be developed. And based on these guidelines, there was a point let's create stakeholder reference group. We're talking about transparency, about participatory processes. And stakeholders are complaining on the European Commission or this agency of regulators, on those bodies that are developing the system. And 2 years ago, which is relatively short time, 2 years ago, stakeholder reference group was created that brings together different European associations dealing with scenario development that are accompanying the official process of scenario development for the energy infrastructure. And that was a game changer. It's very challenging to say which aspect was the most concerning for the group, because it consists of many different stakeholders. Of course, those representing wind industry concentrate on wind, on capacity factors, those representing storage on their part of industry. Civil society looks on different topics, but everything what was put into the regulation and those guidelines, how the scenarios were involved, I would say the interest is even, because it's not only about scenarios themselves, but many different products that accompany the development of the scenarios, which include stakeholder engagement plan, which include innovation roadmaps. So what kind of innovations will be implemented, what includes even methodologies, how the carbon budget shall be developed. So I would say that in this specific case and in the European scene, the regulation put in place also drove and gave the possibility for different stakeholders to accompany the process, and that was opening the channel to be involved and contribute to scenario development.
Thank you, Andrea. I think that's a kind of a thought that kept popping up during the work as well on participatory planning and in general during LTS on importance of regulation, essentially in facilitating these processes, because you can have it as a one-off, but then if you run and you don't have the budget and so on, I think you mentioned the budget issue, then you don't have it. So regulating it, dedicating, let's say, time is crucial to create those channels. Yeah, so thank you very much for that. I'd like maybe revert quickly to the countries again, and now as well with Johanna, and begin. So how do you, let's say, what lessons, let's say, can you say about linking these priorities that the users have about social, economic concerns to the audiences? So, I mean, you've spoken, I think, about the co-creation, but then actually going to the different stakeholders and tailoring everything, let's say, to what they actually want to hear is a big challenge. This requires a lot of resources, a lot of time, and not every modeling agency or team or planning institution has that. So do you have a couple of lessons or a lesson that you can share maybe about how you managed to do that, if you managed to do that as well? I'd like to hear that as well from the other country, let's say, representatives, and then we move to Francisca and Evangelos for some other questions. Please.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to mention that nowadays we are working with the Danish Energy Agency for all of this job. So thank you for all of this support. And of course, I want to mention two different scenarios or two different points of view. I was in the Ministry of the Mines and Energy 2.5 years ago, and I lead the Just Energy Transition Roadmap. Then we developed some similar strategy to go to develop some forums with the stakeholders to try to get all inputs. In that case, the ministry have much more budget than the unit, so we can get to more people. But one challenge at that point, we developed different type of dialogues, and we published all of the result of these consultants. But what's the problem is that in South America, you know, we have a lot of needs. So the people have a huge expectative or perspective. When a ministry go to the territory, they thought that all problems can solve. So this is one of the main change, how you can manage the perspective or the expectative of the population. And the other one, and in our case, as I mentioned, that wasn't the reason that nowadays in the energy plan, now I'm back to the current situation, in the national strategy, that is the energy plan, we try to put the different regions, because one of the lessons is in our country, we have different behavior of the demand, energy demand, and of course we have different potentials of renewable resources, and depend of the regions, it can behave in one way or in another way. So for that reason, we try to separate these behaviors, and in order to manage the better the resources, the energy demands, and the perspective that we get. Now, one point that you mentioned, the people. It's not easy to find people that can know or that have expertise in optimization modeling and environmental and social aspects. Usually you can find the super engineers and mathematical modelers, very smart, but they say, oh, social aspects are not important. Or you can find the other side, people that know the territory very complete and environmental aspects, but they can't move or put in an equations. It's hard. It's not easy. Nowadays, we're working on that. And of course, if you can see some papers and whatever, of course, some people try to develop something. So now I say that it's not easy. So we try to put, of course, we can do alone. We are working with help. The first part was to have our own model, our own optimization model, in order to put, or the idea is to have the possibility to modify the model and include all of this perspective. And the second one is to have different cooperations, like, for example, with the Danish Energy Agency, with another universities that we are working, and with other ministries. And if we can work together, we can probably do something. And of course, the last things is step by step. It's not possible to include all variables in one moment. So we need to start. Nowadays, we are starting, and the idea is one of the other challenges that, I don't know, probably you mentioned, that it's very difficult to continue when the government changes. So we try to publish all the things that we can do in this government and publish some resolution or something in order to say to the other governments, continue with this job and whatever. So I try to summarize all of this expectative and experience.
Thank you. I will maybe ask Francisca and then go back, actually. If Francisca and Vangelos, maybe the question is both to you. I mean, we heard a lot about the information asymmetries, I think, from your presentations, but also about expectations and the asymmetry there. So there's a lot of expectation from the modelers about what the users will do. There's a lot about the users about what they'll do, and it doesn't seem like they match. So I'm just wondering if you have some thoughts about that. So do you have any thoughts about that? How can you kind of balance that, make it a bit more symmetrical, let's say? How do you bypass that? Do you talk about expectations already to the users to try to bring that about, or is that a different issue, let's say? So maybe Francisca, if you can.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's a lot of aspects in what you just brought up, and I wish I had the silver bullet somewhere, but I think this is a very difficult one to tackle, right? So information asymmetries come in so many different forms, and I think one of the main challenges is that there's for either side that is involved a lot of unknown unknowns. So if you, for instance, as a modeler are trying to fine tune a model to fit a specific context, you can only ask about those things you are aware of. So things that are important in any given context that you don't have on your radar at all, you can ask about them. And in return, for instance, you're working together with a modeler from another place with less knowledge about Colombia, but you don't know what is essential for the model to be a good fit for a given context, you can't tell them proactively. So these unknown unknowns, I think, are a real challenge. And I struggle to come up with an idea on how to solve them quickly. So I think participation and really also investing the time and resources to talk about these things. As you say, it's very hard to find someone who is a great mathematician and modeler and also knows the context of a specific region very well. So bringing these people together and trying to bridge those information asymmetries by actually talking and by trying to put ourselves into each other's shoes, I think this is essential, even if it is, let's be real, participation is very hard, very time consuming, and you don't always immediately see why it is so important, but that should discourage us. And one thing I also find very important, just to briefly say that, I think it's a lot about also expectations regarding models and model-based results in the first place. So why do we use a model? What do we do with a scenario? I think there's a lot of habitual use, as in, this is what we've always done in a certain sense. We've always had those economic models that told us the economy is going to grow or shrink by so and so many percent. This is just what we do. So that sometimes hinders us from actually asking ourselves, what are we doing here? What is happening right now? Why exactly are we doing this? And that in turn has then to do with the kind of responsibilities the different actors in the system have. So as a decision maker, for instance, are you really looking for new insights? Do you really want to be informed about something new? Do you really want to broaden your mind and see what happens if? Or are you hoping that there is some piece of information that confirms a certain direction, and that it's more of a confirmation of an already existing path than really broadening what's been there? And that in turn has a lot to do with responsibility. So making a decision, what is really the impact that sets the scale in a certain way? So I think there's a lot of psychology and people stuff happening in this process, and just talking about this and raising awareness for this brings us already further. You mentioned the word stories in your presentation. I think this is such an important thing. So I think we should all think a little bit about how we can use models more as tools for consistent storytelling, for bringing us all on the same page. And that in turn really requires us to think a little broader and look at new aspects that we maybe hadn't considered.
Thank you very much, Franziska. Vangelos, if you can comment on that.
That was a super comprehensive answer. Thank you, Franziska, for that. I just would like to add also a kind of advice also to Johanna, that they go into that, let's say, socioeconomic, broader environmental modeling. We don't necessarily need always to build a super model. We don't need to integrate everything into one framework, and the cost optimization and the welfare maximization and the environmental aspects and. That's why in Switzerland we follow a little bit a different approach by combining different tools, because we have experts on these tools. It's just that we need to bring them together, but of course they cannot do the modeling. So we start from the point that we need first to do this expectation management in order to be able to identify which tools we need in order to complement the scenario analysis that comes out of the models. So that's why in this research program, COSI, Co-Simulation of Society and Energy System, we started first to register these expectations, what the modelers believe, what the users believe. Then, in order to be able to co-create together with them a handful set of scenarios. These scenarios can be classical scenarios, goal-oriented scenarios, and we can use to quantify them with goal-oriented models like times, osmosis, and other type of tools. But the point is not to stop there. The point is to expand the scenario analysis with additional methods. I presented some on my presentation, which can provide additional insights on what is important in these scenarios for the different users. And then we can think of an iterative process of going back and refining these scenarios. It's nice in the paper, but it requires resources and requires commitment and requires budgets, right?
Thank you. Yeah, no, especially the resource topic, of course, always comes up as well when talking on the government level. A lot of these decisions are not very easy to make, and also trying to convince that you need this budget, I think, is a big issue. Maybe I'll go again from the beginning here, and Lars, Sebastian, and also Andre as well. You work at this intersection now, so you work in the agency that does the modeling, but also you are the editor as well of several of these publications, and you have to communicate it as well. So you have a big role in, let's say, bringing the expectations together. Do you have any experience or any challenges that you've seen in practice?
Yeah, I could try to address one. I'm no longer the editor of our climate and energy climate outlook, because that has been moved to closer to the minister. It's very political. It requires a lot of contact between ministries and so on. So we come up with some technical input to it, but they write the report now. I wanted to raise one issue, which is optimism or pessimism, particularly when it comes, and it can be technology optimism or technology pessimism, or it can also be behavioral optimism or behavioral pessimism. And this is something we are dealing with, and have been dealing with as an editor, both of our climate outlook and also on the report that I have been working on for 5 consecutive years. With one of the most ambitious, used to be one of the most ambitious reports on consumer-related emissions, and which is very demanding in the sense that this goes really to the heart of what people's lives are. And in many of these cases, we can be accused of either being too optimistic or too pessimistic in terms of how people behave or how technology develops. We also do a range of what we call technology. We do technology catalogs, which serves as an input to our models. And I can give you just one example of how this works in the sense that this technology positive thinking or negative thinking, just to make things very concrete. One of the things that we have done totally wrong in terms of our outlook is the penetration of electrical vehicles to the market. Now, when I was writing our annual report like 3 or 4 years ago, we still believe that there will be fairly few of them in 2030, and maybe in 2035 if we were lucky. And now we are like 80% of our sales of new cars or something like that is EV. So it's gone much faster than we thought. Why did we think that? I mean, for a number of reasons, we believed only a few years ago that this would take much longer time, both because of behavior and because of range anxiety. People wouldn't change to those EVs, and people buy those EVs now. But what we don't know is that we know that those who have bought it now can afford it. But what when it comes, and this is the behavioral and the societal thing, a social thing, what when we reach those people who cannot spend, I don't know, 50, 75 or 100,000 euros for buying a car? Once we reach those segments of society, and we're there right now, what happens then? Do we know that? No. Should we be optimistic? Right. I don't know. Or should we be pessimistic? I don't know. 5 years ago, we were way too pessimistic. We've been way too optimistic on other things, on power-to-X fuels. So I'm just asking it. The second point I want to raise, I don't know whether we have time, is bias. Those who read our publications are also biased. Those who give us input are also biased. The NGOs would like us to come out with reports saying we're not going to achieve our targets. Why? Because they would like us to do more. So if a report comes out saying that we're far away from achieving our target, that can be used as putting pressure on doing more, right? I used to work for an NGO, so I know it. Others might, some of those who give input to our technology catalogs are those who have knowledge about it, expert knowledge, but they may also have vested interest in giving an impression of a technology being more mature than it actually is. I mean, I'm just saying that very few things are unusual. And we as civil servants are trying to be as objective as possible. This is our duty, to be objective, neutral, and come up with neutral knowledge so politicians can take political decisions based on the best available knowledge that we present them as civil servants. This is our duty, right? We do everything we can to do that. But it's just a little bit harder than it sounds.
Thank you very much. Andre, I just wanted to check. I know you have 5 minutes. Okay, great. Then we can go Sebastian and then Andre.
I'll be fast. So on the challenge of being intelligible from communication, like nowadays people are forming their opinions on everywhere, rarely on governmental communication, and with social media, when you can say, people can say what they want, everything become more a matter of opinions. There is less room for science and environmental science in particular. Like, for example, so in Canada, we have the program of applied research on climate action, which track public opinion about various topics. It's a governmental program. And we saw that in 3 years, so since 2022, the people strong support that on the claim that there is climate change, climate heating has decreased by 10% over 3 years. So we see that there is, even on the basic scientific facts, there is a challenge here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andre as well?
Yes. So maybe I would say from the perspective of the stakeholder reference group, and that they are different types of expectations. So it's not only about achieving the targets. That's also, at least in the European setting, that also the baseline currently that the climate and energy targets needs to be achieved in different time steps, and this is how scenarios are created. But then the expectations come also to the topics related to the level of engagement, providing input, also to something that Franziska mentioned also in her presentation. It's about selecting data inputs, looking into assumptions, and the creation of the stakeholder reference group allowed to negotiate about these expectations, also giving space to find a common ground. There are some elements that you cannot negotiate. For example, you cannot change the framework that is set by the regulation. What you can do, you can go and trying to change the regulation. But there are some of the elements that actually proved that their flexibility and capability to be changed because of this stakeholder input. And something that I personally think, and also that we are trying to promote in the stakeholder reference group to some of the audiences, is to support open source modeling, and I'm sure this will be discussed in the next session, because there are types of knowledge or inputs or assumptions that once they are opened, they are addressing different or specific stakeholders group. group that are interested to check it, to reuse it, to validate it, or to replicate the modeling itself. Maybe not just to challenge, but to contribute to better quality of the outputs, or at least to deliver this the different or broader spectrum of possible alternatives that are always important and relevant from the perspective of the users. But very often those entities responsible for the scenarios do not have capacities to deliver those. So let's say our experience shows that very strong involvement allows to find a common set for the expectations.
Thank you very much. Now, I know we've gone quite a bit over time. I think it's 15 minutes over the adjusted time. And we've talked a lot about participatory and participation, but we haven't had any questions. I think we can take 5 more minutes. We'll shorten your coffee break by a few minutes, but I'm sorry. This is the compromises we do for political reasons. So with that, maybe we can take 2 questions, and maybe also we can see, who can answer them, or maybe everyone can answer. Let's see what we can do in 5 minutes. So Mark, I think, raised her hand first. I saw Matthias and Tina. Maybe you can ask them quickly, and I've seen a lot. I'm very sorry. So, but just based on what I saw. So maybe if we can take them in a row and see how to address them, if that's fine.
I'm a coffee addict in withdrawal. I'll be fast. I wanted to say that I loved the presentations, and I wrote Osmosis with it in mind that people would be doing those kinds of equations. So this is just like a magical moment for me. I wanted to ask a little bit about, and maybe this goes across the board. Somebody said we model and we do things in a way because it's legacy. We've always done it like that and so on. But I wonder if we shouldn't be going to look at the decision or the deal or the thing at the end of the process and work backwards and think about, okay, well, who are the stakeholders we need to bring along? Exactly how much complexity do we need for what kinds of things? And build backwards from the outcome as opposed to just following the same sort of narrative into the future. And then think about, what people want rather than what the model gives them and then trying to convince them that this is what they want. Thanks.
Tina, maybe a question as well, quickly, and Matthias, and then we'll do a quick fire round, 30 seconds each.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for this very inspiring session. This is one of my especially favorite things. I have I try to be very fast, comment and question. The first comment is about like what Mark said, that to whom we are doing the scenarios, which is very important to recognize. But then, Evangelos, you were talking about serious gaming, and then I was a little bit starting to think that why it has to be serious, because in Finland we tried also skiffy type of playing to create alternative scenarios, and that was not so serious. We either have a LARPing with artists to create something new, because I think that we are lacking a vision and to create new visions. And I think it could be also fun. Of course, if you are putting some strange hats to the policymakers, it could be like a bacteria that could make some difficult discussions. But that was more like a question that do you think that there is also room for new methods which are not so serious, but having something fun as well? Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe quickly as well, Matthias, if like.
Yeah, okay. My question will be a lot more boring. I work in my country leading the long-term energy planning process, but there's something with the scenario definition that we use that I think it's kind of tricky, because in my case, I work in a ministry. So we have some range of action within the scenario. So there are external factors and there are some policy levers associated with them. We model, yes, we obtain the capacity expansion plans and whatever, but we tend to forget that those plans consider some policy levers, values. So we have the plan, which is a physical thing, and we have some policy levers that we need to implement, right? So now we in Chile, we are designing the next long-term energy planning process, but we have this this new idea of coming up with this like a policy lever vector, like a pathway that we need to implement. So it's not only having the expansion of the system, but also having a trajectory of policy values in time that we need to accomplish in order to have that expansion. So that's the idea that we have. So my question is, how can we communicate this with the public, with the common person, so that we can have, like it says, build a strong public support for the energy transition? How can we leverage this idea of policy levers so that we can have this support from citizens?
Thank you. I will start a stopwatch and I will go. You can address one of the questions or all, but I will start and maybe we'll start from here and Lars. So here. Yeah.
Very fast. So what Mark?
It's working. You're losing time.
So what Mark suggested is a tool that is called theory of change, where we applied it also in our stakeholder involvement. This means that you start from normally we start with activities, we have outcomes, and then we try to create some impact. The theory of change, which I invite everybody to Google it, tries to reverse the process, to try you to think what impact you want to have.
Thank you.
All right. So I'll address Mark and Matthias in the same answer because I think that applies. Yes, we should totally start looking from the end where we want to go. And I think this is also the answer to what you say. We should use models in a way of where do we want to go, not where is something going to lead us. This is what we do with it. So it's the narrative behind that. And Tina, absolutely, I'm in favor of unserious games. Bring it on. Yes.
No, that's a serious game.
I just want to complement that after when we finish our modeling and create these scenarios, we are going back to the stakeholders and invite another ones in order not just to take ideas, in order to give a feedback. Okay, with your ideas, we get this model and these scenarios, what do you think? And we can complement, and it is a cycle. This is the idea. And of course, I love the funny jobs, the funny games.
Maybe replying to Mark, and as I mentioned at the first example in my intervention, is at least for some group of stakeholders, and that was civil society, NGOs, the solution was we did it by ourselves. It cost a lot of resources. Now, I'm not talking only about the money, but also to going out of your comfort zone to learn about the things. But at the end, you are able to deliver something that you care of.
About the policy levels, actually, that's a very interesting idea, and that's something that you should communicate with your the policy analyst, the policymaker, because with policy levels, then we can speak about implementation of policy, and so it may require more collaborative work, passing more time with policy analysts to try to develop how do we implement those levels, how do we speak about it.
Yeah, just one point on that. We are not trying to model people's lives in 10 to 25 years from now. We cannot model that, but we can model like subcategories of that, such as energy development, and then that can be used to discuss how people's lives will be. And I think that's the way to do it. We've done that in the past. 15 years ago, we went on a tour to 10 cities and talked to 50 people each place about how life with no fossil fuels would be. That was really, really interesting. We didn't get a lot of ideas about how technically to go there, but a lot of ideas on how life would be.
Thank you very much. I think those are all very interesting. I would like to thank you once more. I think we had a fantastic session. Bad time management from my side, but I think we still heard a lot of great insights. So thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much as well for bearing with the last few minutes. I know you want your coffee. I want to, for sure. And yes, please, round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.